They flashed a warning light at my begonias like I was plotting something illegal. Name's Jack, 67, retired aide, mostly tending tomatoes now, though the HOA doesn't seem to like those either. The porch light I installed in '84 still works fine, and maybe that's the problem. Ever had your front steps called a security threat? The flag that started it all. Jack Randall hadn't stepped foot on his childhood porch in 20 years, until the flag brought him back. The wooden slats beneath his boots gave a familiar creak as he climbed the 3 worn steps. Pale morning sunlight filtered through the elm branches that arched over the Randall home, dappling the faded paint and the polished brass plate that still read Randall Residence. He rubbed the plate with his thumb, the metal warm despite the coolness of the spring air. From behind the picket fence, a familiar voice called out. I was beginning to think ghosts moved in. Jack turned, lips twitching into the faintest smile. Frank Douglas, he said. Frank approached, holding 2 steaming cups in a cardboard tray. From Liberty's, he said. Double black. They still make it like motor oil. Jack took the cup. They still serve the hash browns like bricks? With pride. Frank chuckled, then nodded toward the porch. Got a notice on your door. Jack reached for the envelope tucked beneath the old iron door knocker. The letter was stiff and white, the seal of Rosegate HOA pressed in faux gold at the corner. He unfolded it slowly, slipping on his reading glasses to decipher the small, officious print. Frank sipped from his cup. Same font they use at the DMV. You know it means trouble. Jack read aloud, flagpole height exceeds standard HOA regulation. Immediate removal requested to maintain uniform neighborhood aesthetics. He sighed. This again? Frank gestured toward the front yard. Apparently, the new enforcer over at Rosegate doesn't like anything over 6 feet unless it's hydrangeas. Judith Bellman? Jack asked without looking up. Bingo. Runs the HOA like a dress-right dress drill line. Jack looked past the paper, eyes settling on the flagpole at the edge of the porch. The American flag fluttered gently, a ripple of red, white, and blue against the Virginia morning. It hadn't changed. Not in 20 years. Just like he remembered. He didn't speak for a long moment. You remember what my grandfather used to say on Memorial Day? Jack asked softly. Frank nodded. You hang the flag not because you're told to. You hang it because you remember. The words carried the weight of old days, of parades, of folded flags, of a grandfather in pressed uniform adjusting the knot on a young boy's tie. Jack walked to the flagpole and ran a hand down the shaft. The wood was clean, the rope taut. He unhooked the flag, examined the edges. Still crisp. He stepped back, raised the pole by a few inches, and secured it higher than before. Frank arched a brow. Going the other way, huh? I'm home now, Jack replied. Across the street, Maureen passed by with her walker, giving a small wave. Jack nodded in return. Behind them, the world stirred, the clink of forks at Liberty's diner, where the radio murmured the weather, and the special was chicken pot pie with a side of hash browns. Jack could almost smell the buttery crust, see the waitress scribbling checks with faded nails. Frank leaned in, voice dropping. You can't fight City Hall. But you can outlast them, Jack finished. They both smiled. The breeze picked up, pulling the flag outward in a proud ripple. Then came the hum. A slow, mechanical whine, steady and deliberate. From the far end of the cul-de-sac, a sleek HOA patrol car rolled forward. The body was black, the windows darkened, the seal of Rosegate glinting on the side like a warning. It didn't stop. It didn't speed up. But the camera mounted on the hood turned, click, pointing directly at Jack's porch. And it kept filming. No one expected the HOA to have their own patrol, until the spotlight hit Frank's begonias. Frank stood at the edge of his garden, a trowel in one hand and a hose slowly dripping from the other. The earth beneath the begonias was damp, but not soaked. He knew the right balance from years of trial and error. Yet last night, the moment he knelt to pinch off a few brown leaves, the silence had shattered. A narrow beam of white light had swept across his flower bed like a searchlight, pausing squarely on his weathered hands. Now, over coffee at Jack's kitchen table, Frank recounted the moment with a mixture of outrage and disbelief. "I thought it was a prank," he said, voice low but sharp. "Who patrols flower beds? I wasn't streaking across the lawn, I was watering begonias." Jack frowned, thumbing through a folder of papers he'd started organizing since his return. Did the HOA cite any specific violation? "Unsanctioned after-hours yard activity," Frank said, pulling a crumpled printout from his jacket. "Apparently, the quiet window starts at 8. "It's spring," Jack said dryly. "Sun doesn't even set until after that." "They had a camera," Frank added. "One of those dome ones on the hood. Like something out of a spy movie." Jack stood and crossed to the old printer he'd revived the day before. It rattled as he fed in a fresh sheet, and somewhere deep inside, the toner coughed. "They sent you a warning too?" Frank asked. "No, just you," Jack said, reading the email Frank had forwarded. "But they copied half the block." He printed out a list of regulations from the HOA portal. Some were clear: trash days, lawn lengths, but others were vague, arbitrary. Respectful hours of conduct? What does that even mean? Jack muttered, underlining the phrase with a pen that barely worked. Frank set down his cup. "We used to wave at neighbors from the porch. Now I'm wondering if someone's keeping a notebook on me." Just then, Maureen appeared outside, waving a folded newsletter in one hand. Jack stepped out to meet her. "I saw the video," she said in a whisper. "Someone in the HOA chat group shared it." Frank, standing there like a deer in headlights. Frank groaned from inside. "Oh great, I'm viral." "Judith sent a video update this morning," Maureen added, her expression tight. "You should see it." Back inside, Jack opened the HOA portal. Judith Bellman's face filled the screen, stern jaw, rimless glasses, a burgundy scarf pinned neatly at her shoulder. Her voice was clipped, practiced. "Security is not oppression," she said. "It's responsibility. Our patrols ensure safety, cohesion, and respect." The video cut to shots of manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and children riding bikes in perfect symmetry. Jack's eyes narrowed. There's no mention of discretion. Or common sense. As the video ended, the HOA motto faded in white text: "The rules are not personal." "That's rich," Frank muttered. "Feels plenty personal to my begonias." The doorbell rang. A delivery man held out a flat envelope, standard HOA stationery. Jack signed for it, opening to find a trifold brochure: quarterly meeting, mandatory attendance strongly encouraged. Tucked inside was a form: petition for oversight review. Frank reached over and pulled it free. "What's this?" he asked. Jack scanned the first lines. "A formal channel for challenging enforcement decisions. Requires 10 signatures." Frank's eyes glinted. "Let's get 11. Outside, dusk had fallen. Porch lights flickered on one by one. Jack stood quietly by the window, watching as the HOA patrol car rolled slowly past again, headlights off this time, just the steady red glow of a camera poised beneath the mirror. Frank found the form's carbon copy and handed it to Jack. "You still remember how to fill one of these out?" Jack gave him a wry smile. "Mr. Filibuster doesn't forget." Frank held out a pen. Jack signed. Frank found the next field, point of contact, and filled in his name with a firm stroke. Just then, the paper jammed in the printer again. Jack chuckled softly, clearing it by hand. "You know," Frank said, "next they'll knock on doors at dawn." Jack didn't laugh this time. Frank found a second page hidden inside the packet. Petition for oversight review. He held it up between two fingers, like a clue unearthed in a courtroom drama. He turned to Jack, eyes sharper than they'd been in years. "Think it's time we use their rules against them?" Frank only meant to honor the fallen, with a flag and a folding chair. What he got was a gun in his face. The sun had only just begun to burn through the veil of dew that clung to the rooftops of Ashburn when Frank stepped out onto his porch, the solemn silence of Memorial Day hanging in the air. He wore a freshly ironed striped shirt tucked neatly into his slacks, and in his arms he carried an old folding chair and a neatly folded flag. His movements were careful, ceremonial, his hands had done this every year for decades. Across the street, Jack Randall watched from behind his screen door, cradling a mug of coffee. He had known Frank long enough to recognize reverence when he saw it. Frank's ritual was simple: sit quietly by the porch, raise the flag slowly, and spend the morning in silence. Today was no different, until it was. Frank unfolded the chair with a quiet click and placed it beside the railing. He bent slightly, his knees stiff, and attached the flag to the pole that had once belonged to his father-in-law. With practiced fingers, he hoisted it halfway up the metal rod, pausing as it caught the breeze and fluttered. A soft creak. Then another. Jack leaned forward. A glint of silver-gray metal moved slowly up the street. It was the HOA patrol's marked SUV, lights off, windows down. From the passenger side, a small device blinked red. Frank didn't notice. He sat down, hands on his lap, gazing at the flag. Jack heard it before he saw it, a small chime and a static click. The patrol vehicle slowed, then parked directly in front of Frank's yard. One of the officers, young and square-jawed, stepped out. His HOA-issued vest bore the words, "Safety and Compliance." "Excuse me, sir," the officer called. "We detected noise outside standard hours. HOA Regulation 8.4 states that." "I'm sitting," Frank replied, calmly. "On my porch. Like I do every year." Jack stepped out of his own house, coffee forgotten. The air suddenly felt heavier. The officer pointed to a small sensor clipped near the flagpole. The sound monitor triggered at 6:47 a.m. "We're required to check." Frank raised his eyebrows. Triggered by what? Patriotism? The officer approached. "I need to verify compliance." "Please step inside, sir." Frank remained seated. "This is my porch." A second officer got out of the vehicle, hand on hip. "Sir, you are required to comply." "No," Frank said, quieter this time. "This is still America." Then it happened, so fast Jack almost didn't believe it. The younger officer's hand shifted from his belt to a holster. A cold black shape cleared leather with a soft snap. "Hands where I can see them." Frank froze, mouth agape. He had not moved, had not even stood up. The porch was silent except for the wind moving the flag. Jack shouted, "Put that thing down. Are you insane?" The officer's finger hovered near the trigger, but his eyes darted toward Jack's voice. Then, like a man waking from a spell, he blinked and lowered the weapon, slowly, reluctantly. Frank's body gave out. He sank into the folding chair as if all the bones had left him. His hands trembled, and without thinking, he pulled his handkerchief and pressed it to his face. Neighbors had begun to gather, peering from behind curtains or front lawns. A teenage boy with a phone held high stood in the shade of an elm, camera trained on the scene. The officer holstered his weapon without a word and turned. The second officer muttered something into a radio. Then the vehicle reversed, slowly, its tires crunching softly against the gravel. Jack rushed to Frank's side. "Are you all right?" Frank nodded but didn't speak. His lips moved around words that didn't come. From across the street, Maureen emerged holding a glass of lemonade, her expression pale but resolute. "Here," she whispered, offering it to Frank. He took it with both hands. The teenage boy clicked a few buttons and sent the video, first to his parents, then to the neighborhood forum. Within an hour, it had a dozen reposts. By noon, it was in the hands of local reporters. That evening, Jack sat at his kitchen table, reading the HOA bylaws with a magnifying glass, frowning at every vague phrase. A knock on the door interrupted him. Frank stood there, steadier now, holding a printed flyer with bold letters at the top, "Community Emergency Meeting, Petition Discussion." Jack didn't expect many signatures, but by sunset, the porch light was blinking in every yard. The sun dipped low over Ashburn, brushing the brick homes in soft amber. The air was thick with the warmth of early June and the faint scent of honeysuckle that crept along the edges of old picket fences. Jack stood by his screen door, one hand resting on the frame, the other gripping a clipboard with the first draft of the petition. The words were simple but resolute: suspend HOA patrols until independent review. He hadn't planned to become the neighborhood's rallying point. That role belonged to someone louder, someone less cautious. But after what happened to Frank on Memorial Day, after the gun, after the silence, someone had to step forward. And somehow, it had fallen to him. Frank had barely stepped outside since that morning. Jack visited every other day, checking in, sometimes bringing over soup or something from the diner. Frank's porch had gone dark, the flag quietly folded and resting on a side table, untouched. "They won't listen until we stand together," Frank had whispered last time. The words had stayed with Jack like a heartbeat. The idea had come while Maureen was dropping off a paper copy of the HOA bylaws. She had printed the entire packet at the town library after Jack's printer gave up again. "They used to do this in the 60s, you know," she said, eyes sharp behind thick glasses. Porchlight protest. Subtle, but visible. Like tying a ribbon to a tree. That was how it began. Just one flyer, a few conversations over coffee at Little Liberty's diner. Jack placed the petition on the counter next to the old glass case of cherry pies. The diner's owner, Rita, leaned over and read it slowly. She didn't say much, just nodded once and handed Jack a slice of meatloaf, on the house. By late afternoon, Maureen was making her rounds with her denim tote, hand-sewn decades ago, each patch a memory. She rang doorbells, smiled gently, and asked if folks would consider reading the paper. Jack watched from his porch as neighbors, some he hadn't seen in years, began turning on their lights just a little earlier than usual. It started with the elderly couple on the corner who never had visitors. Then the Jeffersons, whose teenage son had filmed the Memorial Day clip, followed. By dusk, a steady rhythm of soft yellow glows lined the street. Inside, Jack sat at the table with a fresh copy of the petition, smoothing out the folds. He added the image Maureen had printed, a still from the video, Frank's face mid-breath, etched with fear. He didn't include the gun. He didn't need to. Back at the diner, conversations circled the now-famous video. Every table had a copy of the petition, some smudged with ketchup, others folded into purses. A man in overalls recounted how in 1967 his father had joined a protest against zoning laws. "Didn't think we'd see the day again," he murmured, tapping his glass of sweet tea. As twilight deepened, Jack walked his street once more. He saw people lingering on porches, some waving, others simply nodding. Unity wasn't loud here, it hummed like crickets in the dusk. Back home, he poured himself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, eyes adjusting to the evening. The light on his porch blinked once, a small flicker, then steadied. Just as he reached to switch it off and on again, a message appeared on his phone. It was from a number he didn't recognize. Just a single sentence. "Judith's drafting a countermeasure. You better be ready." He looked up, instincts sharpening. Across the street, just past the diner, something new caught his eye. A sleek pole stood by the edge of the HOA property line. Near the base of the woods, it was barely visible against the trees. But the lens glinted, unmistakable. A camera. Brand new. Mounted high. Pointed straight toward his house. 3 folding chairs, 2 pots of weak coffee, and one showdown years in the making. The Rosegate Community Center hadn't hosted a crowd like this in a long time. The wood-paneled walls, once a soft maple, had faded to honey brown. A ceiling fan turned slowly above, creaking faintly with each rotation, stirring the warmth of a Wednesday night in June. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, competing with the murmurs and shifting of metal chairs scraping the floor. Jack sat near the front, palms resting flat against the table, pages of notes before him. His pen lay beside his old leather folder, unused. He had rehearsed the words a dozen times, but it was never about the speech. It was about standing in the room. The right room. Across from him, Judith Bellman sat straight-backed, her blazer crisp, eyes sharp and unwavering. She leafed through a printed report with clinical detachment. It listed data points, safety improvements, patrol logs, anonymous surveys. Since the introduction of Rosegate's Safety Watch, she began, voice clipped, we've seen a 14% drop in noise complaints. Residents have reported feeling more secure. Jack waited a beat. At what cost? He stood, holding up a photo, the now familiar image of Frank's pale, stunned face during the Memorial Day incident. Is this your idea of security? Frank sat quietly in the third row, a Navy emblem on his shirt, hat clutched in his lap. He gave Jack a small nod, more grateful than approving. The room stilled. Jack stepped forward. This isn't about one patrol. It's about power without accountability. HOA bylaws clearly state, oversight shall be exercised in balance with the dignity and safety of all residents. A few murmurs rose. Carl, a neutral board member with a rust-colored sweater and thinning hair, leaned toward the mic. I've got grandkids here. Neighbors. I don't want anyone scared on their own front porch. Isn't there another way? Before Judith could respond, a soft voice came from the back. My daughter won't play outside anymore, said a woman with tired eyes. She said the patrol car watched her like she did something wrong. An older man followed. I was told my porch chair violated aesthetic standards. That chair was my wife's. She passed last year. I don't care if it's ugly. The tension wove itself through the hum of the ceiling fan. Judith remained composed. These anecdotes, while emotional, do not represent the broader trend. Structure brings peace. We cannot allow sentiment to override order. Maureen, from her seat near the aisle, stood and addressed the board. Her voice wasn't loud, but firm. Then let's bring structure back to its purpose. Suspend the patrol. Just temporarily. Let an independent review take place. Then we can decide with clarity. Carl rubbed his chin. Show of hands for the motion to suspend HOA patrols indefinitely pending review. Hands rose slowly. Jack's. Maureen's. Carl's. 2 more followed. Then 3 hands stayed down, Judith's among them. Motion passed, Carl confirmed after a moment. 5 in favor, 3 against. A breath seemed to release from the room. Not loud, not even audible, but felt. Judith gathered her folder without a word. As she passed Jack on her way out, she paused, just enough to meet his eyes. You've just invited chaos into our streets, she said, her voice like cold iron. She walked out, heels clicking across the wood floor. Jack remained at the table, hands clasped, watching the door close behind her. Outside, the porch lights across Rosegate blinked on one by one. But just beneath the glow, near the HOA's central sign, something new shimmered in the dark, another camera, perhaps. Or maybe just a reflection. For tonight, it didn't matter. The vote had been cast. When Jack opened the HOA archives, he expected forms and fees, not missing receipts and personal bonuses. The rain was steady that morning, tapping against the wide windows of the Rosegate Community Center's 3rd floor. Jack Randall pulled back the blinds, peering out as drops streaked down the pane like faint trails of ink. Behind him, the room was still, a shallow hush broken only by the soft whir of a ceiling fan and the occasional creak from the old wood beneath his shoes. Filing cabinets loomed along the wall, half-labeled drawers poking out like forgotten thoughts. Carl stood by the door, arms folded. This is as much access as I can give without it becoming official, he murmured. Jack nodded, running his hand across the dusty edge of a cabinet marked Security, 2021 to 2023. The lock clicked open, revealing thick manila folders stuffed haphazardly. He pulled one free and laid it on the oak table under the amber light. Inside, line items scrolled like a bureaucrat's lullaby, until one caught his eye. Security enhancements, vendor, independent asset watch, amount, $4,200, monthly. Jack flipped the page. No receipt. No vendor address. just the same name repeating every month. Carl, Jack said quietly, did you authorize these patrol expenses? Carl leaned over, squinting. No, he said slowly. And I'd remember that vendor. We don't have a contract with anyone by that name. Jack flipped further, reaching a personnel listing, Rosegate Patrol, authorized operatives. He blinked. 2 names, identical, appeared twice on the list. Paul and Taylor. Same birth date. Same ID number. That's a duplicate. Maybe even fabricated. Carl shifted. If this is true, she's not just strict. She's corrupt. A folder on the far corner was faded and torn, the date barely legible, 2017. He opened it to find outdated inspection reports, some missing signatures, and one scrawled post-it, check with Ellen. Overdue. Jack stood up. I'm going to see someone. Outside, the rain clung to his coat as he made his way to a quiet bungalow near the edge of Ashburn. Mrs. Ellen opened the door slowly, her white curls bouncing softly. Jack Randall? Haven't seen you since the days your daddy used to mow that hill out back. Inside, over a lukewarm cup of tea, she studied the papers. Judith always signed those things herself, she said, pointing to a missing receipt. No oversight. Told us it was sensitive expenditure. She once said community trust didn't require transparency. Back at the community center, Jack scanned the last few files. A document labeled Camera Installations, gifted by contractor, had no signature, no letterhead, just a one-line note. Per conversation. He leaned back, fingers pressed to the worn table edge. A thought crystallized in the quiet, this wasn't just mismanagement. This was misappropriation. And then he saw it, tucked into the emergency fund file. Monthly transfers of $4,200 labeled contingency security payments, routed to an account in the name of J. Bellwood Holdings. His hands were still as he reached for his phone. The rain still fell. Steady. Knowing. He scrolled to a contact saved years ago, Douglas M., State Oversight Commission. The line rang once. If I send you something, Jack said, voice low, steady, can it stay anonymous? Jack never liked being on camera, but this time, he had the receipts. The morning sun slanted through the glass of the WNHR 96.1 FM studio, warming the edge of the host's coffee cup and bouncing off the console switches. Jack sat stiffly, hands folded, a stack of files resting in his lap like a fragile declaration. His voice cracked slightly at first, then steadied with each word. It's not about money. It's about trust. Across town, the diner had turned down the TVs and cranked up the radio. Maureen set down a cherry pie mid-slice to listen. Frank, still in his faded veteran's cap, leaned close to the receiver on his porch, nodding. Jack spoke plainly, no flourishes, no drama. He explained how camera installations labeled as donations had no paper trail, how a duplicate name appeared twice on the patrol payroll, and how a monthly sum of $4,200 from the HOA emergency fund disappeared into a private account. It's not about rules, Jack continued. It's about who gets to break them, and who doesn't even get a say. The host gave a soft whistle. Sounds like you've been busy. Calls started coming in. An 84-year-old man, voice gravelly with age and indignation, told of how he was fined $75 for a broken deck chair. A young mother said her daughter's sidewalk chalk drawings were classified as graffiti. Another voice, soft and unsure, described how she stopped gardening altogether out of fear. Back at the diner, someone pinned a note above the counter, free scones if you support Jack. Maureen scribbled down the key points from the radio, already preparing a fresh round of community petitions. Her denim satchel bulged with printouts. Frank, unable to sit still, drove to the station and waited outside. When Jack stepped into the hallway after the broadcast, Frank greeted him with a handshake and a nod that said everything. No words were needed. That evening, the local news website featured the podcast at the top of its homepage. The headline blared, HOA under fire after shocking radio revelations. Clicks surged. Comments poured in. Jack didn't smile. He closed his laptop quietly, leaned back in his chair, and looked at the clock. Almost dusk. He walked to the front door, opened it slowly, and spotted a manila envelope resting neatly on the welcome mat. Inside were photographs. His daughter stepping into her car. His wife walking the dog. A birthday dinner viewed through the dining room window. No name. No note. Just the silence that settles before a storm. By the time Judith arrived at the emergency meeting, half the board had already resigned. The summer sun slanted warmly across the freshly trimmed grass of the Rosegate Community Garden. The fountain in the center bubbled softly, its gentle rhythm mingling with children's laughter. Folding chairs had been replaced with wooden benches. Tables were draped in gingham cloths, topped with pitchers of sweet tea, bowls of sliced peaches, and stacks of paper cups. It was the first community meeting not held behind closed doors. Jack stood near the edge of the garden, hands in his pockets, watching Carl adjust a microphone atop a picnic table. Maureen circulated with a tray of peach cobbler, her denim satchel now stuffed with thank you cards instead of petitions. Frank sat on a bench with his grandson, who clutched a paper flower made of red construction paper and duct tape. Judith arrived 10 minutes late. She strode into the garden with purpose, crisp white blazer buttoned tightly, her phone still in hand. But her steps faltered when she saw the scene. Only Carl remained at the board's table. The rest of the seats were empty, name placards turned down, papers left in neat, resigned stacks. Carl met her eyes, then turned to the crowd. As of this morning, 4 of the HOA board members have officially stepped down. I'll be acting chair until we hold elections. Judith opened her mouth, but the murmur of conversation drowned her out. No one turned to her for guidance. No one waited for her to speak. Jack stepped forward as someone called out, "We should nominate Jack." Cheers rippled. A few people clapped. Carl nodded encouragingly. But Jack shook his head, smiling faintly. "I appreciate it," he said. "But I'm not here for leadership. I just want to tend the garden." Judith froze, lips parted, but said nothing. For the first time, her composure cracked, not with anger, but with something closer to disbelief. She turned slowly, eyes scanning the people who once feared her, now casually chatting, laughing, sharing cobbler and stories. She walked away quietly. No one followed. Carl tapped the microphone. "We're forming a new community watch group," he said. "No patrols. No surveillance. Just neighbors looking out for neighbors." Applause broke out, this time sustained. Frank's grandson toddled up to Jack and held out the paper flower. "For you," he said. Jack knelt down and took it gently. "Thank you," he whispered. "It's perfect." As the crowd dispersed into pockets of conversations and shared memories, Jack wandered to the edge of the garden. He stood beneath the old oak tree where, just months ago, the first surveillance camera had been mounted. Now it was gone, replaced by wind chimes, swaying in the breeze. He watched as children darted between bushes and adults discussed ideas for a new annual community day. A few laminated copies of Jack's radio interview lay on a table under a handmade sign, "Top story of the summer, hope wins." Frank walked up beside him, wiping peach juice from his hands. "Quite the ending, huh?" Jack smiled, eyes on the paper flower in his hand. "Maybe just the beginning." An older gentleman approached, squinting at Jack over his bifocals. "Think you'll ever write a book about all this?" Jack chuckled. "Only if I can make the villain wear sunglasses indoors." They both laughed. As the sun dipped low over Rosegate, its light scattered across a garden once marred by control and fear, now blooming again, quietly and freely. On a quiet afternoon, long after the last meeting had ended, the garden at Rosegate bloomed brighter than ever, no cameras, no commands, just neighbors sharing the shade. What began as one man's resistance against overreach grew into a quiet revolution, stitched together by folded petitions and porchlight promises. When power forgets its purpose, it takes courage, and community, to set things right again. Like wildflowers breaking through a cracked sidewalk, decency will always find a way to grow.